Darkcast Network. The light shines brightest on our indie podcasts.
Hi, I'm Courtney Fenner, and along with my co-host Amanda Cronin,
Hey,
we are Nefarious Nightmare.
we are a podcast that covers true crime, the paranormal, weird unsolved mysteries, and all with a personal approach and a sense of humor.
We also end our podcast with good life advice, such as wear deodorant or don't be a Richard.
Courtney and I have covered cases such as the Baker Hotel in Mineral Wells, Texas, and the tragic death of little Sharon Matthews.
We've also covered the case of Gloria Ramirez, who was, very unfortunately, dubbed the toxic lady in the media. And also, in episode 1, we have an interview with Jason Vukovich, the Alaskan Avenger, and his sister, Angelina.
So let's all gather around the bonfire and roast serial killers and marshmallows.
Yes, come on in.
You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Audible, pretty much anywhere you find really great podcasts.
Thank you guys so much for listening, and welcome to A Nefarious Nightmare.
Hey, Rainbow Warriors. This is my disclaimer. Beyond the Rainbow is a true crime podcast. It's not suitable for young children, and maybe not even for some adults. I tend to swear like a sailor, and I'm kind of proud of that. Listener discretion is advised. Hey there, Rainbow Warriors. Welcome to Beyond the Rainbow, True Crimes of the LGBTQ+. I'm back! I'm your host, CJ, and I missed you all so much. Well, I got all my stuff moved to my new home on the coast of Oregon. And thankfully, my daughter stayed with me for a week to help me move stuff in. This move has pretty much been madness. I drove 8 hours from California to Oregon to pick up a U-Haul in Oregon, because it's a lot cheaper. And then I drove 9.5 hours with the truck the next day back to California. It took me longer due to getting the truck late, so I had a late start. And then on my drive, I hit some rain, and coming down mountain curves, oh my God, in the rain, in the dark, and it was windy and icy, and the truck was blowing everywhere. My fingers were so sore because it surely was a white-knuckle trip. The truck was a 17-footer, which might not be big to some people, but to me, I drive a little Jeep Cherokee. This truck was pretty good size. That same night, after the 9.5-hour trip, my daughter, one of her friends, and myself packed that U-Haul full. We worked well into the night when I got there. The next day, my daughter and I left for another white-knuckle ride. My right knee ached so much from all the driving. We found a little bit more rain and some darkness on more curvy mountain roads. And I hate going downhill on curves. It just scares the bejesus out of me. Just when we were about 25 minutes away from my new home, boom, behind me, flashing blue and red lights, they popped on. It was a cop, and he was pulling me over. Now, where the fuck am I supposed to pull over on a one-lane curvy mountain road in the dark? I kept driving until there was a shoulder wide enough to take the U-Haul truck and safely pull over. The officer was actually really nice. I got lucky. But he did pull me over for, get this, going too slow in a 17-foot U-Haul truck in the dark on a curvy, slick, downhill mountain road. Are you fucking kidding me? He didn't give me a ticket, just a warning, and told me to turn on my hazard lights if I'm going under the speed limit. And my daughter would have shared in the driving if it wasn't such a big truck. So for the next 25 minutes to the new home, I continued to tell my daughter what a hazard I am. The next morning, we started to unload the U-Haul. And sometime during this, I hyperextended and twisted my left knee. I've been hobbling around ever since. And it sucks because my new house is a 2-story. And all the bedrooms and the 2 bathrooms are upstairs. But at least I had my daughter there to help me. She took so much upstairs for me and was such a great help. And I was able to spend Thanksgiving with her. We didn't do the traditional American turkey dinner with all the fixins either. We decided we're going to do that for Christmas if she can come up. Instead, we had our St. Patty's meal of corned beef and cabbage. I threw it in the crock pot and it was done when we got home from the movies. We actually ventured out to a movie theater. And you know what we saw? House of Gucci. After listening to the episode of House of Gucci done on Autumn's Oddity podcast, we had to go see the movie. Plus, both my daughter and I are huge fans of Gaga. My daughter read an article that advised people to go see it on a big screen. So we took the advice and we did. Honestly, wait for it to come to your living room. It's long as fuck and quite slow in many places. Gaga was the best part. Adam Driver was good, as he usually is in all his movies. But so much could have been cut from this 2.5-hour film. At least if you watch it at home, you can go and do other things while it's on. I was happy I listened to Autumn's Oddities episode, so I knew what the crime was about, though. I had never heard of the crime before. And Warriors, my last bit of exciting news. I did something besides moving. I did another something, and I'm super jazzed about it. Remember my friend Paige from Reverie True Crime? We joined forces and we created a podcast network. Darkcast Network is the name. True crime, paranormal, conspiracy theory, and obscure type podcasts are the genre. We have an exciting lineup of podcasts. So many different shows applied, we wish we could have taken them all. But since we're just starting out, we wanted to give everyone we do take the attention that they deserve. So we decided to cap our numbers for now. And the ones we have so far are outstanding. Our network doesn't officially launch until January 1st, 2022. But I would like to extend an invitation to all of you to come to our Facebook watch party. It's going to be around 3 p.m. Pacific Time, 5 p.m. Central, and 6 p.m. Eastern. That's New Year's Day 2022. Several hosts from different podcasts will be there talking up their genres and answering some questions. We'd love to have you come participate. Or just join us in our celebration to toast our new network and to kick things off. Bringing us our missing but not forgotten LGBTQ plus person is Jackie.
This episode's missing but not forgotten LGBTQ plus person is Edmund Tillman from Manhattan, New York. Edmund was only 14 years old when he disappeared from the vicinity of Pitt and Houston Streets in Manhattan. This happened about 7 p.m. on August 10, 2005. His mom had dropped him off at school to take a placement test he needed to advance into the 8th grade. Edmund had just come out to his mom 2 months prior to his disappearance. His mom claims his sexual identity was not a problem for her. However, within the 2 months that Edmund had come out and he disappeared, his grades were slipping and he was starting to come home later each night. After his disappearance, his mom had discovered that he was talking to adult men and may have had an 18-year-old boyfriend. Edmund is considered an endangered runaway. Although he took no belongings with him, it is believed that he left of his own accord. There have been sightings of Edmund since in the West Village area of Manhattan. It is also believed that he could have traveled to San Francisco. If found alive today, Edmund would be 30 years old. He is a black man who was 5'3" tall when he disappeared, but could be 6'3" now. We just don't know. A picture of Edmund and an age-progressed photo can be found on CJ's website at BeyondTheRainbowPodcast.com. He has dark brown hair and eyes, a mole on his left eyebrow, and a birthmark on the left side of his abdomen. He is pigeon-toed, right-handed, and has his left ear pierced. If you have any information on Edmund's whereabouts, please call the New York Police Department at 646-610-5000. Back to you, CJ.
Thank you, Jackie. Now let's get into this episode. But before I do, I have a disclaimer of 2 dogs that are shot and killed in this story. You know how much I hate animal cruelty and animal deaths. So I'm going to just try and breeze by it without too much detail. Drugs. They can cause you to run your mouth about your personal life, he said. He didn't do them, but he got them and he would share them. Sometimes he would sell them to local motorcycle riders. He was a doctor and a professor of pharmacology at Loyola University in Chicago. How apropos that he taught about drugs, and then he turned around and gave out the drugs. One might wonder, how did he acquire his drugs? He was the assistant director of the Institute for the Study of Mind, Drugs, and Behavior. Part of his work there required him to conduct experiments that were funded by the government using psychoactive drugs. Psychoactive drugs is a pretty open term. Under it falls depressants, stimulants, opioids, and hallucinogens. Things as mild as alcohol and weed to stronger, more detrimental drugs like cocaine, heroin, and LSD. Working with these drugs in the 70s, it became easy to stockpile some away for his recreational purposes. Although remember, he didn't use the stuff on himself, but now we know that the government supplied the drugs he had to give away. The he I'm referring to isn't the bad guy in this story. Dr. Charles Scudder hated living in the city of Chicago. He hated most everything about the busy metropolis. He hated the smells. He hated the crowds. He hated the concrete jungle. Even though he had a mansion he lived in with his life partner was someone who started out as Charles' housekeeper, a younger man named Joey Odom. Charles once commented that his favorite part of living in the city was watching the rats drink out of his pool in the garden. I'm not sure if he was being facetious. By 1996, Charles was damn sick of the city. He was sick of university politics and the hustle and bustle of life. Charles had been married to women before he got together with Joey, but both of his marriages had failed. Charles realized the marriages most likely weren't successful because he was not living his truth. Once he figured out the problem and got with Joey, he became a much happier person. However, something, no longer his love life, but something else, just felt off. Charles longed for a simpler life with his man Joey. He wanted to get away from the high price of taxes and his monthly electric, gas, and water bills. Charles wanted to live off-grid. Then suddenly there was a death in his family that left him with a small inheritance. Charles received this money by way of a monthly stipend. So he quit his job and his appointment at the Mind, Drug, and Behavior Institute, but not before he seized 12,000 doses of LSD. And 2 human skulls, of course, because who doesn't need those? Charles decided to sell his Chicago mansion, and he sold or gave away most of their possessions. Charles, who was now 50 years old, found some acreage he liked in the state of Georgia. It was over 40 acres, isolated in the woods and away from immediate neighbors. It was in a small town called Treon. The property in Georgia was the complete opposite of Chicago, and this tickled Charles. He and Joey camped on the property with their dogs, 2 huge English mastiffs, while they had bricks brought in. 45,000 bricks, actually. Lovingly, brick by brick, the men built their home, their castle. The castle didn't have any modern amenities. Even their bathroom was an outhouse outside that dissolved their waste with the use of chemicals. Aside from their outhouse, they also built a 3-story chicken coop. The first floor was, for the chickens, duh, and an area big enough for some food storage. The second floor was for canned foods and their vast porn collection. And the third floor? Well, they dubbed that the Pink Room. The Pink Room was interesting, actually. It was equipped with 2 mattresses covered in pink sheets, whips and chains, some sex toys, and some pornography. It was where Charles and Joey entertained their guests. They even kept a logbook noting what kinks their guests liked best. Charles and Joey called their place Corpsewood Manor. The name they derived from the bare, haunting-looking trees dispersed eerily around their home. Following along the theme of the spooky name for their house, the men decorated the inside of their home with macabre and occult-type decor, along with artifacts from the Renaissance era. A large winged pink gargoyle watched over the entrance to the manor. The 2 men spent their entire savings on their new home, and they lived off the $200 stipend that Charles received each month from the inheritance. Charles would refer to their brick home as a mausoleum. Sometimes he'd even call it a tomb. But nonetheless, Charles was happy there, as was Joey. They grew their own food. The chickens produced their eggs. They even had grapevines in which they harvested the grapes and made their own wine. I should probably mention Charles and Joey were Satanists. I don't know about you, but I knee-jerk and twitch a little when I hear the word Satanist. I immediately think sinister and evil, because most of us have been conditioned to do that. Like the many that twitch if you tell them you're gay. But in all honesty, a Satanist isn't really what they're portrayed to be in movies. Yes, they are anti-Christ and anti-Christians, but I'm anti any organized religion. Charles and Joey followed under the religion of Levian Satanism, which loosely translates to they chose to worship themselves over a deity. But for the sake of argument, any Satanists of 1976 were definitely considered evil, sadistic devil worshippers. Charles was proud of his Satanism, and he drove around in a black Jeep that had pentagrams painted on each side. Can you just imagine it? The visual of 2 gay Satanist guys 40 years ago in a southern state? It all kind of just blows my mind. But then again, they did live hidden away from most of society. Oh, they had their distant neighbors. They even had some hunters who would pass by on Charles and Joey's property. The hunters would ask permission to hunt on their property, and Charles and Joey would allow it. But first, they'd dole out some of their homemade wine as a way to be hospitable. One of the hunters who was granted permission to hunt on the property was a kid named Kenneth Avery Brock. He went by Avery. After meeting and spending a little time with Charles and Joey, Avery decided that these gay dudes were eccentric millionaires by the way they lived. Little did he know how far from the truth that was. By late 1982, 6 years after Charles had quit his job and left Chicago with Joey, the men were getting a bit of a reputation in town. The reputation was for throwing wild sex and drug parties. And as you can probably imagine, rumors of these parties ran rampant whether they were true or not. Also in 1982, the hunter I mentioned before, Avery Brock, he was only 17 years old. He had just been kicked out of his house by his abusive dad. And Avery was busted a couple times stealing food to eat. About that time, he moved in with one of his buddies, a 30-year-old named Tony West. Tony lived in a trailer not far from the Corpsewood Mansion. Both Avery and Tony liked to hunt whatever was in season on Charles and Joey's property. It seemed that the men would also take part in Charles and Joey's pink room parties. They'd join in consensual sex with the hosts and whatever other guests might be around. Avery and Tony also partook in the drugs and wine. Tony also had mental anguish that he suffered from. When he was 13 years old, he was playing around with a loaded gun. It went off and he accidentally shot his 2-year-old nephew. Tony was sent to a mental institution until he was 18. Tony had endured extensive psychiatric therapy up until now for this trauma. Now at the age of 30, he was living in a piece of crap trailer. But it was a shelter, and it was the closest thing he knew to a home. Once Avery moved in with Tony, it didn't take much to convince Tony that the two queer devil worshippers nearby were wealthy millionaires, and they were hiding a fortune in their castle. Avery told Tony that the two were just begging to get robbed. On the evening of December 12, 1982, Avery and Tony drove to pick up another nephew of Tony's named Joey Wells and his friend Teresa Hudgens. The four of them took a trip to the Pink Room. They were going to party. Once in the room, the four partied on Charles' LSD and homemade wine. After a couple hours of partying, Avery went outside to his car and he grabbed a .22 caliber rifle. He walked up the steps to the 3rd floor of the chicken house where the Pink Room was, and he fired 4 shots into Charles' boyfriend, Joey. Then he took the rifle and he shot the host's mastiff dogs, who were just laying by the wood stove keeping warm. Avery and Tony tied Charles up. Then they demanded he tell him where his fortune was hiding. Charles was confused, knowing he didn't have any money, let alone a fortune to hide. Tony's nephew Joey and his friend Teresa tried to flee the home, but Avery's car wouldn't start, and because it was so cold out, they were forced to go back into the house. Avery and Tony scoured the castle looking for money, but they came up empty. They looked for other items that they might be able to steal and sell, but they couldn't find anything of value. They did try to take a harp that Charles owned, but it wouldn't fit into Avery's car. Tony went back into where Charles was tied up, and he shot him in the head at point-blank range, killing him instantly. Nephew Joey and his friend Teresa were finally able to escape from Avery and Tony. Avery and Tony ended up stealing Charles' black Jeep with the pentagrams on the sides. Oh, that won't call attention to you guys at all, you dumb shits. Then 4 days later, 2 things happened. One, a neighbor dropped by Corpsewood Manor, and he saw that there were bullet holes in the home's door. He called the police. And 2, Teresa, the nephew's friend, went to the police and told them everything. Teresa and nephew Joey were not charged with any wrongdoing after they cooperated with the police in full. During the days after the double murders, Avery and Tony headed towards Mississippi in their attempt to flee police. They stopped at a rest stop off Interstate 20 and they fell asleep. When they woke up, there was a Toyota parked next to them. They decided they needed to ditch the Jeep with the pentagrams and find a less conspicuous car. Tony ended up killing the man in the Toyota next to them. He was a Navy lieutenant named Kirby Phelps, and then the 2 men stole his car. Kirby's body was found later that morning, about 200 yards from the rest stop. Avery and Tony ended up in Austin, Texas. They'd been out of money for a while, and they decided to rip the stereo from the Toyota and pawn it. Afterwards, the 2 men parted ways. On December 20th, Avery was tired of running. It had been 8 days since the first murders of Charles and his boyfriend Joey. Avery returned to Georgia, and he turned himself into law enforcement. On Christmas evening, Tony was in Chattanooga, Tennessee. This is where he walked into a police station. He was dressed in Kirby's suit, and he gave himself up. He was then extradited back to Georgia. Both Avery and Tony confessed to their crimes. Their trial received a lot of press and media coverage at the time. Media was having a heyday. They were blasting headlines like, "Kinky, fetish-driven gay men, killed for their satanic ways. Satanic gays making moves on straight guys, murdered." In the end, the juries made the decisions about Avery and Tony's fate. The juries found the men who confessed to the crimes guilty. Avery was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences. Tony was sentenced to death, but it was overturned later, and he was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences as well. Both are still serving their sentences in different Georgia prisons. Our quickie crime this episode comes to us from Windsor Locks, Connecticut. It's a case that frankly baffles me as to why it happened in this day and age. It's such a new case, I was waiting for a bit more information before I would share it with you. But it seems like new information isn't coming from it. I'll keep checking it, but I really don't see much else happening. Unfortunately, it's a crime that there's never going to be any unicorn justice for it. Only sadness. An 18-year-old lesbian named Lauren Leslie, she went by Leela, was just starting off in her adulthood. She had a whole wonderful life ahead of her, but that wonderful life would be cut short in a flash. Leela had a girlfriend. The girlfriend lived in Windsor Locks with her 44-year-old mom, Dolores, and her 65-year-old stepdad, David. Late in May of this year, 2021, Leela was over her girlfriend's house hanging out. Around 1 p.m., screaming and yelling came from the girlfriend's house, and then there was a series of pops. When the police arrived shortly after, they found 3 people dead and 1 seriously injured. The gunman and stepfather, David, was dead. Dolores, the girlfriend's mother, she was dead, and Leela was dead. The girlfriend was in critical but stable condition after some time in the hospital. The motive was never revealed in the news media, but it's been speculated by Leela's family that it's because of homophobia, David's homophobia. David was having a hard time dealing with his stepdaughter's sexuality. Leela had even told her older brother about her girlfriend's stepdad, David, and how he was uncomfortable with their relationship. And that's why Leela rarely went over to her girlfriend's house. After David murdered Leela, his wife, and shot his stepdaughter, he completed suicide. As I said, there's no unicorn justice for this case. Just great sadness for Leela's family. Her mom was even hospitalized after Leela's murder for shock and stress. And then there's the sadness for those who love the other victims. Since the girlfriend's name was never given out, I can't even find out if she made a recovery from her injuries. I'm assuming because they had her in stable condition at the hospital, she must have. Just remember, Rainbow Warriors, it's not a crime to be gay, unless you're a murderer.